Yeah, welcome to the Common Good Podcast. Today is the 13th of January, and it's a Thursday, so everybody's safe and sound. Nothing to worry about here.
I got nervous a little bit. You said the 13th. I was like, is it Friday?
You got that right. Hey, Dan, our little theme song there, is that played on a piano? Is that a guitar? What is that?
Where's you're hearing mostly piano. It's a percussive piano. This was written and performed by my friend Ben Grace. I think you've met Ben Grace.
I know. Oh yeah. Oh boy, I know Ben Grace. I mean, he wouldn't know me, but I know him. I'm a big fan.
I told him I wanted something for this that was like the West Wing meets cable news.
Well, as you know, I've become I'm 7 days into being a guitar player. I bought a guitar and started playing guitar. So now I'm hearing these little things. I'm thinking this is a song I should probably learn. I mean, one of the songs I should learn is probably the Common Good.
It's probably the first song you should learn. Yeah,
theme song. I don't yet know how one. I mean, I'm just making my way through. I have 6 of 8 chords that one is supposed to know: C, G, A, D, E major, E minor. Just because you only have to lift one finger up. That's what I got, and then trying to work on some strumming and some strumming patterns and all the rest. So I'm guessing it's probably somewhere in there, but I don't know anything else about it. I don't know how you transpose songs. I don't know how to hear a song and then translate it to a guitar. I don't know any of that stuff. So if someone's going to work up the guitar chords for the Common Good theme song, maybe one of my goals could be to start the podcast playing the theme song.
Let's do the theme song live.
We're going to talk about a pretty heavy topic today with why we think that the federal death penalty should be abolished and the death penalty across the United States and every state should be done away with. That's a heavy topic. Nobody likes talking about it. I'll tell you, I do a bunch of work on this week. We're telling people that this weekend, Sunday and Monday, we're going to be in Washington, D.C., calling on the federal government, the Congress, and the White House to make some moves. We'll talk about all that as we go. Even the activists, anti-death penalty activists, they don't like talking about it. They talk about it because they have to. It's a heavy topic. It almost always involves a heinous crime, something horrible, and then levels of injustice, and then meanness and cruelty. Just there's no part of it that's any good. So it's going to be, it's a heavy topic today. Anybody's even stuck with it by reading the title today.
If we didn't pull you in and keep you with the title, I don't know.
Good for you. So, but before we ask listeners to tell us where they're calling in from and all that, or where they're listening in from, a little lighthearted, good news today. Some people listening might know of the people that work in the Vote Common Good world. One of those people is Mary Beth Kennedy, and her husband, Adam Kennedy, had a little baby yesterday.
Yeah.
And now putting the word out. Little Lachlan Kennedy out in the world. Little guy taking his first breaths. Everything's going great. And there's just a little do-gooder. One more little do-gooder in the world.
Lachlan, I like that name.
And one of the things that I was always struck by when I first got into Christianity, I was a teenager. And I started to meet people early in my Christian days, the first months, I think, maybe for sure the first year, that were really committed to a theological world called Calvinism, which some people are familiar with. It's a quirky little fringy idea that's caught on in far too many circles. And one of the tenets of Calvinism, they actually have these 5 tenets that it's built around. And one of them, the first one, really the worst idea probably in religion. I mean, just truly the idea that this is an idea that people hold to and think is a good one and want to recruit other people to believe and somehow have to teach people to believe this, is this notion called total depravity.
Yep.
And the idea of total depravity is that you are, I'll say this about total depravity. It's clear what they're getting at.
They're not beating around the bush with this.
Not beating around the bush. It's just, it's vote common good. What do we want you to do? That. Total depravity. What are you?
You are horrible.
Totally depraved. Now there's lots of nuances to it where people even listening to this who hold to this view would be saying like, no, what we mean is in a spiritual way. But anyway, so the idea is that you're a sinner through and through.
From birth.
And that's from birth, might even say from conception.
Yeah,
might even say from conception. Yeah, because it was actually, and the way they get to some of that, and you have a bunch of theologians that argue this, that the actual act of the sexual act that creates sperm and egg meeting is part of the idea. So anyway, it's a big bunch of nonsense. Well, one of the arguments I used early on, before I had theological arguments and before I had Bible arguments, because I was new to Christianity, so I didn't know that the Bible completely obliterates the notion of total depravity and the other foreign notions of Calvinism. The argument that was instinctual to me was, I've never seen somebody in a hospital, maternity ward, and nursery walking around and just saying, look at that little dirty, rotten sinner laying in there. Look at this totally depraved piece of humanity that's just, destined and should be destined to hell. And if God doesn't judge this little crying baby, then that's only because of God's goodness and grace.
Yeah.
This idea, like, nobody says that about a baby. You might say it about a toddler. You certainly might say it about a 13-year-old. You might get to it, when you look at a 74-year-old who's the president of the United States and is as corrupt as Donald Trump was. That might drive you to think that. But nobody says it about a baby. You look at these little sweeties, and little Lachlan. So little Lachlan is the light of the world and the salt of the earth and the goodness of God and all of that. That's what you say about babies. Mm-hmm. Nobody says this other.
I will say the last 4 or 5 years, just seeing how ridiculous people can be and how thoughtless about others they can be, whether it comes to immigration and kids in cages or the pandemic. It's made me question, maybe this total depravity thing is real, because it's really some horrible stuff out there.
It's often said there's two things that can turn you into a Calvinist. Great success, for God has blessed me with all these things at the hand of God, because no shadow moves, it doesn't move by the hand of God. So great success or great struggle. A need for a big explanation as to why do we do the things that we do. And look, we're not talking about total depravity today, other than the fact that it's going to loop into why some people support the death penalty. It's actually part and parcel. But it's always good to remind ourselves of some untruths that are being spread through the religions that some of us hold to be so important. But look, and Christianity is not the only one that holds views like this. There's other religions that have a very similar set of views around these things. So it's not the nonsense that was early Calvinism and total depravity was infecting religion across the world and continues to. So it doesn't come from Christianity. Christianity is actually in my view, is an alternative view to Calvinism. But this little Lachlan, God bless him, little angel, little light of the world, little good guy. Now, we should do a whole episode sometime on why do people do things that are not in our own best interest? Why do we self-harm? Why are human beings one of the only animals, if not the only on the planet, that hurts itself? That's a really good question. But total depravity is just not the answer. Like, a really good question with a bad answer doesn't mean that the bad answer has to stand. It's a bad answer to a very important question. And also on that note, I will say, just before we started this podcast, I walked across the street to our neighbor's house and participated in a legal adoption ceremony. They adopted their little daughter, Rosie, through the foster care system. She's been with them for a couple of years. Today it became official on a Zoom meeting with a judge and all the people. They do official proceedings, and there we have it. A beautiful little adoption ceremony. Otherwise, fine people doing an extraordinarily good thing today. So just kind of a happy day, around this world. So,
yeah.
And when you talk about hard things and happy things, you don't do it you don't ping pong back and forth. They both coexist. They're intermingled. They're always tied up in and with each other. So anyway, I'm Doug Padgett out of Minneapolis, Minnesota, and Dan Dietrich out of South Bend, Indiana. We'd love to know where you're from. Marjorie, thanks for coming in already. Brian, thanks. And then we get these comments sometimes over here that I don't know what they are. vom.red. We get a lot of that from different people.
Yeah, it's like
is that
spam bots on YouTube. I don't know.
Oh, is that where they're coming from? YouTube?
Yeah.
We should show people sometime. I wonder if I could do it. This might be kind of a fun little project so people can see what we see. Maybe I'll see if we can get that, if I can get that together sometime to show people what we see, especially on the comment side, because we broadcast this live stream podcast, not only on the audio version on the podcast, which if you haven't yet subscribed, please do. And if you do subscribe there, maybe check us out online too, on live streams. But we do it on Facebook pages. We do it on Twitter accounts. We do it on YouTube. We do it on Twitch. Never have gotten any response out of Twitch. I think Twitch probably isn't really our
scene.
But all that to say, there's like a lot of places where we put this out. And then when we see comments, which we use this system called Ecamm, when you see the comments as the side that I'm on versus what you're on, I don't even see from where they have come. Like, did they come from Facebook or from Twitter or from YouTube or from Twitch? I don't see that. You see that on your end, but you don't know which Facebook page they came from or which Twitter channel or which YouTube channel they came from. So, or even what country. And if Marjorie hadn't told us that she's from Saskatchewan, Canada, we wouldn't have known that, this international live stream and podcast is connecting to Marjorie. So really glad to have all those people along. And we want your thoughts and comments here on the death penalty as well. It was 5 years ago when I started my first actions as being an anti-death penalty activist and went to the Supreme Court with a group of other people. And in a deliberate effort, we held a banner that 17 people were holding that said "Stop Executions," big bold letters. We did that specifically to get a photo. That photo then would be used in press releases and become something that shows up in the death penalty. That action of taking that photo with the "Stop Executions" banner worked. You probably wouldn't notice as just a regular taker in of the news that when you see an article about the death penalty and they'll put in some photos, there's not a lot of photos you can get of the death penalty that anybody would want to see, right? Maybe a death chamber here and there. But this "Stop Executions" shows up all over the place. It's Dan, maybe you have it for the screen. Anywhere you see that banner stretched on a set of stairs, I know in some of our photos here we have it. It shows up all over, and that's something we've been trying to do, is to move public opinion, old school style, like with a banner and a billboard kind of idea. Mm-hmm. You hold it up and you make the point, and then that turns digital and starts being spread around and shows up in newspaper articles and television news reports and all the rest of it. So I've been about this for about 5 years, thinking about the death penalty though since I was in 9th grade. Do you remember when you started thinking about the death penalty, Dan? Do you have a beginning stage of?
Yeah, I grew up, solidly in the religious right bubble, and so the death penalty was just one of the things that we were for. So it was like, yeah, absolutely, like people should get what they deserve. God is a God of justice, and this and that. Here's that infamous "Stop Executions" photo.
You can see those men that are around there, all those officers with the bullhorns in their hands and so on. They arrested us. They gave us warnings to put down the sign and come off of the steps. You can see where the steps start there, and you can see where the marble starts there. The flat marble place. You can basically hold that sign that we had in our hands from where this photo is being taken. If you're back where the photographer is, you can hold it up, you're fine. Once you step up on those stairs, now you're on Supreme Court property. You can't do it there. You can't do it on the other side of those pillars. You can't do it inside the building. No way. So they draw a line somewhere, and the shorthand in the First Amendment right world is that your First Amendment rights stop at the Supreme Court steps, which is kind of this tongue-in-cheek argument about, why somewhere. But that's where it is. We knew that. We did it here on purpose. We knew how high we wanted to be. We were staging this photo because we wanted to raise awareness, and we're willing to risk arrest when we did. We did get arrested. We did go to county jail. We were charged with federal crime. We're convicted of the federal crime. And then the judge passed no consequence, no penalty, but had to find us guilty. So it's a big deal when you do something like that. Sometimes when someone gets arrested in Washington, D.C., they're arrested out on the street or in an organized protest, or they're arrested by the White House or by the Capitol building. And then there are different kinds of crimes. So this weekend, some of us are going to go to Washington, D.C., the 5-year anniversary of this action. I'll talk about why it's this time, also on Martin Luther King Jr. Day. So on January 16th and 17th, we're going to have some events, Sunday the 16th and Monday the 17th. And on Monday the 17th, it's going to be a chance for people to be arrested. But in this case, it's going to be over by the Senate building or the House building. And then it will just be a fine that you'll have to pay to the city for this little, crime that you commit there. So there's different levels of trouble you get in when you choose to raise these voices. And it's been a long tradition of people in the United States to use direct action, nonviolent protest of being arrested to arrest people's attention around an issue that's important. Mm-hmm. So we're going to be part of this. This channel, if you're watching this online, the podcast where you're listening to this, will have a bunch of the material that comes out this weekend. So we'd love for you to keep up live or in recorded fashion. But if you wanted to come to Washington, D.C. on the 16th and 17th, you can go to deathpenaltyaction.org and see all the details, get signed up. Or you can go and sign the petition that's there. We're getting thousands of people signing a petition asking for the federal government to pass a law that bans executions at the federal level. Mm-hmm. And to demolish the death house, which is the facility in Terre Haute, Indiana, where federal death penalty victims are executed.
Yeah.
So there's a particular building on the property of the federal prison in Terre Haute, Indiana, and that's where they do it. And we're asking for Joe Biden to use his power of the president in an executive order to dismantle and demolish that death house and to remove the death penalty as a federal remedy for the crimes that people commit.
Yeah.
Now, for those of us in this work that are doing this, and we'll talk about this in a second, that's motivated by the fact we think that the death penalty is an inappropriate, wrong, immoral consequence for anything that someone has done. It's my stance. It's not only built around the idea that we execute people who are not guilty of the crime that they've been committed, that they've been convicted of. It's also people who are guilty of the crime they were convicted of. This is an inappropriate, wrong, immoral judgment to put on someone. Yeah. And we shouldn't do that. There's a lot of things we shouldn't do to people as a punishment. Mm-hmm. And the eye for an eye and tooth for a tooth idea, we don't do that, right? In other words, if someone's found guilty of a crime, we don't just
do that crime to them.
Right. unless it's taking a person's life, then we do. So this idea that that somehow justice is mediated by repeating the crime. It's like the dad that, when the dad sees his son hit the sibling, and then the dad comes over and hits the son and says, "I've told you not to hit people."
Right.
It just doesn't make any sense. And we're not talking about just a small one-off thing. We're talking about the federal government using its federal powers or the state government using its state powers to execute someone. But there are also all the reasons that people have been for the death penalty, there's alternative reasons. We'll talk about a whole bunch of that, but that's going to be that's sort of what we're up to. That's the thing where we're getting at.
And Doug, you asked when I started thinking about the death penalty, and sort of grew up, and that was just part of the culture. Mm-hmm. This poll, it's a recent poll. It's like within the last year or so. It says 3/4 of white Protestants say the death penalty is morally justified. And so this is kind of the world that I come from, where it's just eye for an eye, Old Testament justice. But then you start to see some holes in the armor of the argument for the morality of the death penalty. And you see things like 1 in 9 people executed, one person has been exonerated. So we get it wrong 1 out of 9 times. And I think Shane Claiborne and others have pointed out, if airlines, didn't land the plane 1 out of 9 times, like that would be a pretty catastrophic situation. Right. But we're allowing this level of error when it comes to life and death situations. And so you see a stat like that, and it just gets the wheels spinning, hopefully. Like, maybe this isn't the best idea for the federal government and state governments to have this power over us.
For sure. And so the statistics of what you're getting at are just glaring, right? There are many more people on death row, but of the people who've actually been executed since 1973 in the United States, 1,540 at the time of this statistic, 186 other people have been exonerated off of death row. So that statistic is comparing the number of executed people with the number of people who've been exonerated, independent from the number of people on death row. So some people see that argument and they're like, yeah, but you need to take 186 compared to the number of total people on death row. It's still way too high. It's just shockingly too high. Well, we're going to have Abraham Bonowicz on here with us. I can see he's in the waiting room, Dan. He sent a little note in the window there.
Oh, he's not in my waiting room.
He's not in your waiting room. Okay, I'm going to send him a note. That's curious.
Let's see if I can text him the link here.
Yeah. Abraham Bonowicz is the executive director of Death Penalty Action. He's going to talk to us about a bunch of the stuff too. And this is, I want to make some comments about the religious argument, because if you can throw that previous stat back up there, Dan, where it says that, 3/4 of white Protestants believe that the death penalty is morally justified, which is a great way to ask the question, right? Like, one way to ask the question is, should we have it or not? The other is, do you think it's morally justified that we have it or not? Yeah. There's a lot of people who are willing for us to do things in this country that we don't think are morally justified, right? There's all kinds of that goes on. When you look at this religiously unaffiliated down at the bottom, the numbers switch a lot. Atheists and agnostics, the numbers of those who support the death penalty as being morally justified and those who believe it's not morally justified, split to about 50% each. So it moves from this 60%, 70% number of religious people, which tells you, and statistics tell us of people who live in certain parts of the country and their own religious affiliation, that religious people, especially Christian religious people, support use of the death penalty in the United States at a higher rate than people who are not religiously affiliated or base their idea. So it tells you that maybe the use of religion is one of the convincing forces for people to support the death penalty. What also confused me as I got more into Christianity is that Jesus, the primary teacher, leader, son of God character in the Christian story, is opposed to an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth narrative. In fact, he calls it out directly. You have heard it said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, but I say to you. So then the people who say, well, what the First Testament, the Old Testament, the Hebrew scriptures are talking about is how a society should organize itself. What Jesus is talking about is how an individual should respond to another individual. So what Jesus is, this is their argument. What Jesus is correcting is we shouldn't take the demand on a government to perform an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth and apply that to personal relationships. So what he's correcting is, you've heard it said, do as the government would do. But I say to you, you as an individual should forgive an individual person for the individual problem that they cause to you as an individual. This is the argument that people try to make to sort of make sense out of what Jesus is saying. That just doesn't hold any water at all. Once you start sort of slicing and deciding, oh, so the eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth edict that comes in one part of the Old Testament, that only applies to the government. So all the other stuff that's in that section doesn't apply to me as an individual, only applies to the government? Of course not. That's not how the scriptures could possibly be used.
And it's also usually, this argument is used by people who say things like, the Bible is plain. You don't need to do any hurdles, gymnastics to interpret the Bible. Just read the Bible. You'll get what it says. And then when Jesus says something like, don't do this eye for an eye thing, they're like, well, you need some nuance here.
Let me teach you a back bend that helps you get over the get over the sawhorse. Look, it's the great dilemma that we face. And so why is it that religious people, especially white Christians in America, are more supportive of the death penalty than people who are not in that social category? It's really a problem, right? And also very often it's people who otherwise don't trust the government also really trust the government to execute people appropriately.
Right. Yeah, it's like, we don't trust the government to run the BMV, but
That's right.
we'll trust someone who deserves to die.
Yeah.
Yeah, the logic is just...
So it's just perplexing and difficult to get yourself around how somebody can hold these views that feel so contradictory.
Yeah.
And then, as has come up a number of times, and we've mentioned here, that many times people who want to tell us that you can't be a moral Christian person and support Democrats for public office will immediately start saying, I'm pro-life, so I can't support Democrats. But being pro-life also means supporting the death penalty because somehow it means supporting the victims. Mm-hmm. It's a difficult thing. Yeah. And what we do in our country, and this is going to be a little, I have to say this very carefully, and it's not as well defined in my brain as it should be for as careful as I need to be here. Our judicial system cannot be overly connected to the desires of the victims of crimes for what the retribution or punishment or justice needs to be. We don't live in a society of vengeance and personal vendetta. Yes, victims should have some say in the impact of a crime, but we can't simply have our state or federal governments be the deliverer of whatever justice a victim wants. It's just a hard truth, right? Numbers of us have been violated by other people's behaviors, and we have our own opinion and our own struggles with that harm and behavior. But the government shouldn't simply come to us and say, we've determined this person is guilty. What do you want us to do to the person? That's not equal justice under law. That's not, you can't run a society that way. It can't go that way. Mm-hmm. That can sound cruel and disempowering of victims, but I'm just saying, as a society and as a judicial system, that can't be the way we do it. Now, we should listen to victims about their wants and desires. And, we have a very good friend named Susan Bosler who is around our world and went on the ride with us for immigration reform. Her father was murdered. She was the person tried to kill her too. She then advocated that the person not be executed by the government, and the government disagreed with her. So we're always going to live in these situations where our government in and of itself has a compelling interest in mediating out consequence and punishment for crimes, and how we choose to do that, which has to be influenced by, taken in the feelings of victims, but can't simply be the doer of the victim's desires. Mm-hmm. So this gets hard.
Yeah.
It's really hard, because if you've known someone who's been murdered, and most murders, by the way, in the United States, happen by people who know the victim and often are related to them or in some kind of a relationship with them. So what you're often talking about here are murders that have happened inside of domestic violence situations and other kinds of crimes. So the people in the family system don't always agree on what should happen next. So it's complicated. If you pay attention to the events that we're going to be running in the next few weeks or over this next weekend, you're going to hear from some family victim members. They're very compelling stories. These people you're going to hear from in our events are all people asking for the federal government to not use the death penalty as a standard, of course. They're informed very deeply, and they've come to these conclusions. So it helps people who think, well, I've never been a victim of a heinous crime like a murder. I wonder what I would think about the death penalty if someone I loved was killed. Well, here's some examples of some people who view it this way. There are other people who are family victim members who feel differently. It's not the primary or only way, and it's not even how someone determines their own view on the death penalty. I know some people who were for the death penalty. A family member was murdered, and that whole process caused them to no longer support the death penalty as a moral cause. So individual people's stories are very powerful and important. We should hear them, but we also have to know that's not simply what we do as a society when we decide on the consequences for crimes. We don't simply go to the victims and ask for them to tell us what we should then do as a society. Yeah. So our society has a compelling interest in and of itself to be looking at.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's right.
All right. So any luck on Abe yet? We getting
trying to get
close?
Get him on here. It's still
Abe. Go to the eCam link that we've sent you if you're watching this now, not a Zoom link or anything else. Yeah, and use your Chrome browser.
He's using Chrome. It says
if you're on a Mac.
It still says connecting, but it is
try
not
restarting your computer.
Just restart everything.
And that's basically what we're asking for on the death penalty is a restart on this thing. The country has had an on-again, off-again relationship with the death penalty.
Yeah.
We're currently in an on-again space. There was a period of time, 1973 to 1979, where it was off, and now it's back on again. That's when I first got involved in thinking about the death penalty. It was a debate class in 9th grade, where back in the 1970s, when I was in like a junior higher and stuff, there were all kinds of social issues that I really thought as a junior higher we would have different ways to think about them by the time I'm a middle-aged old man. Turns out that's not true. I remember the things we were debating in 9th grade. People had different topics in our debate class that we would take up. Death penalty. I ended up on the death penalty side. On the death penalty assigned for. So I was thinking a bunch about that as a 9th grader, as much as you think about it. And I was on the death penalty is not a valid moral action for us to pursue. It was an easier argument to make and that process convinced me, we shouldn't be using the death penalty. But other issues that people were assigned at that time had to do with the environment, because the EPA had just been established in 1973, so that was all new and fresh. Women's rights, the ERA was then still a live issue that we were going to have an equal rights amendment added to the Constitution, so equal rights was an issue, and war, because the Vietnam War had come about. So here you have these 4 issues: the death penalty, the environment, the issue of women's rights in our society, and war. here we are, 2022 in January. There's some ninth grader in a topics of the day or debate class. Were the same arguments that people were making in 1979 about this stuff.
Now they're not allowed to talk about those things in school because it's too close to CRT.
Well, I will say the thing
critical racy for me.
The thing we were not debating back then at the school that I went to here in Golden Valley, Minnesota, was race. That one wasn't top of was not top of mind at the time. That has stayed just the same. It's still being avoided.
Yeah, if you had dug a little deeper in ninth grade, race plays a huge part in the death penalty. Racial bias. People of color are more likely to be prosecuted for capital murder, sentenced to death, and executed, especially if the victim in the case is white. There's this huge disparity between just who's charged, who's convicted, and who is actually executed. It's the scales of justice. Someone's got their thumb on one side, and it's just horribly racially biased.
There's no doubt about it. From top to bottom, how people are arrested, how they're prosecuted, how they're even investigated at first and then arrested and then prosecuted and then sentenced. All parts of the system are influenced by racial bias.
Yeah. Especially
in states where the death penalty is being invoked. So just one little explanation. We have states where there's the death penalty. I wish Abe was on here. He could remind us what that current number is, 9, something like this. And then there is the federal death penalty, which applies to crimes that are considered to be of federal nature and the military. Those are at the federal level. So if the federal government stops executions because of law from Congress and work and signed by the President of the United States, which we hope they'll do this year, it's only going to stop the death penalty at the federal level and for military members. States will maintain them. The Supreme Court, 1973, I think to 1979, if I have those dates right, declared that the death penalty was a violation of people's constitutional rights. So it was prohibited around the country. That's why we were at the Supreme Court saying stop executions. We were wanting the Supreme Court to rule that the death penalty is not morally right and violates the constitutional rights of the citizens of the United States, to ban it across the country.
Yeah.
What we could get to is that each state's legislature decides to stop the death penalty or ban it altogether, and the federal government does, and we get rid of the death penalty all across the country at a state and federal level without an argument about its constitutionality or not. I'm afraid that the Constitution might allow states to determine a system they think is not going to violate constitutional rights and go ahead with executions. It doesn't make it morally right. The Constitution is not a moral document. Mm-hmm. This is a separate question.
Yeah.
There's this argument I really want to take seriously here, and I see it here in the chat from Jay. It's long, so I don't know if you can get it all up on the screen, Dan, but I'll just sort of recap some of it. Jay, thanks for this thought. Jay's asking this question by saying there are some crimes that are so over the top, so horrific that the death penalty is the only acceptable option. Society has a right to defend itself and the common good. Sometimes society is pushed so far to the edge that the death penalty is not just proper, but for the defense of society, but is needed for the defense of society. Nuclear weapons. Then he gives a list of some things that are over the top. That's a powerful argument for a lot of people. Like, shouldn't there be a gradation that we're going to reach where there's just been too much wrong done that any of our other consequences, punishments, or responses are insufficient? It's a really important question.
Yeah.
The death penalty just simply doesn't answer that. To execute the Boston Marathon bombers, that was a horrific activity. To execute Timothy McVeigh for blowing up the federal building, to execute Jeffrey Dahmer Now, I mean, I'm naming people these are real cases, that murdered and cannibalized people, like just horrible stuff. To execute somebody who has sexually assaulted and murdered people across state lines at the federal level. Those are horrific actions.
Mm-hmm.
Giving the person a sentence of life imprisonment or executing the person. The idea that somehow now we've raised up the punishment to a higher level, that's on whose scale did we finally get justice? When Timothy McVeigh was executed, did that seem like, oh, there's something that now reached the level of blowing up the federal building in Oklahoma City to execute the Boston City bombers? Well, now that's equal. That rose to the level of the crime. That's not what punishment should do. If we have to have a means by which there's greater level of response so that society can feel like, well, we did all we could do, we have to have some moral boundaries around that. Right? I mean, you could say, nobody is, and most certainly I don't think that, I don't think Jay is making the suggestion, but one could argue, hey, it's even more of a punishment than executing someone? Torturing them every month for the remainder of their life. Like with electrodes or cutting off a finger or gouging a part of their body. Like you could come up with things that are really, really bad. Mm-hmm. But we say to ourselves, no, hang on a minute. We don't do that. There is this country's notion of itself is that you can't do cruel and inhumane punishments. Mm-hmm. The argument, aren't there things people do that are just so bad we have to do something more, can't violate that other ethic. And frankly, the argument, we need to have an escalation so we can always have a greater punishment for a greater crime, that's really calling for something closer to cruel and inhuman punishment, if you really wanted to do that. Because you would say, oh, if someone commits a crime by crossing a state line and they can then receive the federal death penalty at a federal level, which is the kind of stuff that happens. Like one person that was executed recently by the Trump administration's edict when we were in Terre Haute, Indiana. And no one's defending the actions of these people. This is not saying what they did isn't bad enough to deserve death. That's not the argument. The argument is death as a punishment is a wrong way to punish people. That's the argument. At least that's the argument that I'm making. This gathering we're going to have this weekend on Martin Luther King Day on Monday the 17th and on Sunday the 16th in Washington, D.C., which you're invited to or to watch here. That there's going to be people making all the arguments. It's racist. It's unjust. It's just plain wrong. I'm making a different argument that this is not a moral action, and we should hold ourselves to some kind of a moral sensibility about these things.
Yeah.
The argument, we have to ratchet it up, it doesn't work because this person who was executed kidnapped somebody and then took the person across a state line because they just happened to live close to a state line and committed a murder in another state. That made it a multiple state crime, which made it eligible for the federal death penalty. In neither of the states where the kidnapping or the murder happened was the death penalty something that was available. So if he had simply taken the person across a city line and done the same thing, no death penalty. To take somebody across a state line now invokes a death penalty. This is where it's just unfair. It's not even reasonable. And it's not as if, okay, this crime now has been seen as so heinous because you crossed the state line. So we're not even using the death penalty by some score that we're keeping, like this person's life or this action is worth this many points, and you get to a total number of points and you think, now we have to ratchet this up. The argument, I understand it and I get it. And there's something intuitive in us where we would think, hey, we just can't have the same kind of punishment for all the things because then we have no way to call out something as worse than something else. Mm-hmm. We do have to have that in our society. This is worse than that, and we condemn it. but the punishment itself, you reach a limit where you just can't match the evil with the punishment.
Right.
And that's frankly not what we should be doing with our criminal justice system, is trying to mediate out vengeance,
Right.
quality of wrongness to someone.
Yeah, it's hard because I get the impulse. Like when I see in the news that someone has done something horrible to a child, like the rage inside me, like I want that perpetrator to suffer. I want them to die. Like that's what I feel. But I don't think that the government should have that power to decide who lives and dies.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's why it's a tough issue though, because we have these emotions around justice, and like you said, the punishment is never going to be horrible enough to bring the person back to have real justice and restoration. It's sort of like, we all know there's a line there, right? Like we all know that if someone kills your child, you shouldn't be allowed to kill their child. Like that's heinous. We all agree. So we agree there's a line somewhere. It's just a matter of finding, most developed countries in the world have decided that the death penalty is on the wrong side of their moral line. And they've chosen as societies and institutions to not have it. We're kind of the outlier in the world stage. We have the death penalty along with countries like Yemen,
and Saudi Arabia and China and Iran. Like the group that we're in, like if there was a get together of nations that allowed the death penalty for a meet and greet, these are countries the United States doesn't do a lot of other things with. We really are an outlier in the use of this. And I'll just make the point. Can you put that statistic back up about the number of executions and
let's see that one.
So this 1,540 deaths by execution in the United States since 1973. That number, I think, is a little bit higher now, maybe a few higher. So think about this for a moment. We've continued to use and to keep the death penalty alive and well. Have executed 1,540 plus people. Do you really think that only 1,540 people committed heinous crimes worthy of the death penalty? Is that what you think? Do you feel like, no, it's really kind of working? A lot of people have committed these kinds of heinous crimes. Jay's point could have gone on and on with the list of things that people have done. We can all imagine them. We can all live in fear of them. We don't even mediate out the death penalty to people who commit these crimes. It's only some of the people who have committed these crimes. So the very function of it in our society, even if you want to take away the morality, even if you want to say we can't really argue about racial impact, just the lack of equality of punishment that's delivered to some people and not to others. Even if you wanted to say no innocent person has ever been executed. Say you want to make that argument, right? Since 1973, at least. And you say, look, 186 people have been exonerated because we've figured out how to be sure that people are exonerated, and anyone who's actually been executed, everything was tricked out to the point, and no innocent people. So you take that argument off the table. Like you take all the other arguments off the table. What you're left with is, if you support this, in my view, you have to contend with the idea that only 1,540 people have been executed. So we are doing a good job mediating out the punishment for these things, and all these other crimes didn't rise to that level. So either we just agree this thing is being done at a capricious level that is dangerous, that doesn't serve any public good, that doesn't protect society any more than keeping people away from the general population if they are considered to still be dangerous. No one is safer. Morality hasn't been served. Justice hasn't been mediated out because all these other people are dying in prison of natural causes. So the way it's actually playing out, I just can't find a rationale any longer for it, short of people truly feeling like, well, we just need to be able to do something. And I don't think our justice system in this country does a very good job of dealing with the psychological pain of people who feel that crime is not adequately responded to. So we should probably deal with that, as a society. So anyway, that's my argument. Abe Bonowicz is telling me that number is currently correct, 1,540. And that, once again, don't argue with producer Dan about his numbers, or if you should have a humidifier inside your case for your guitar. Man knows what he knows, and you're just not helping anybody. You're just not helping anybody by fussing with him about this. So we're asking people to join. We're asking people to participate. We're asking people to care about these issues. Look, we know that a lot of us aren't going to go to Washington, D.C. and hold up a sign you see on the screen here that says Congress passed the Federal Death Penalty Prohibition Act now. But some of us will be there doing that, so we'd like you to share that around when you do. If you think differently about these issues, don't disengage from this conversation. Continue to make your argument. If you want to put together a little TikTok or a straight-to-camera rant about why you think the way you think about it and want us to see it, be glad for you to send that to us. Send us a link. Share anything you want. We'll play it here. We'll be in those conversations. Absolutely. So as somebody who wants the federal death penalty to stop and the state death penalties to be abolished in this country, I think we're better off if more people are talking about it, even if people are arguing the other opinion.
Yeah, we need to be talking about it.
Yeah, one of the things that's shocking is just how much nobody wants to talk about it. I mean, even coming into this today, I'm not nervous about it like that. It's just like, are people going to actually care about this? And are they just going to be like, oh my gosh, there's those people talking about death again? I mean, the death penalty, those two words are just, you don't want to talk about either of those things in your life. Who wants to talk about that?
Your next dinner party, bring that up if you want the conversation just to immediately end.
I can. Abe Bonowicz and others can personally attest to that. I'm sure that that's a conversation stopper. Well, I know for some people it's a conversation starter, I guess, but for most people it's like, wow, step away from the cheese table on that one when they start going down that road. And again, I wish these issues didn't break so politically evenly. Because I would love to see, I know there's some Democrats who support the death penalty. There are. I just don't hardly know any Republican elected officials at the federal level who oppose the death penalty. Just a few. I mean, just a teeniest little number. And some might only, even say like, well, hey, in Ohio, we're going to stop the death penalty because we're not doing it right. Our system isn't quite right here. We're not getting this quite right. That's not the same thing as opposing it, and we're hoping that people will actually seek to oppose it. So join us next week. Pay attention here over the weekend to these channels where you're seeing all this. We're gonna be live streaming from there. We're going to try to arrest people's attention by being arrested on Monday if the spirit so moves. That's what we're going to be up to, trying to call for a little bit of common good and some other ways to raise awareness around all this.
Yeah.
Hey, tomorrow, it's Friday. We think we have the astrophysicist back. We're going to get that man out of the clouds. And now there's a whole new, stargazing telescope or galaxy gazing telescope to talk about.
Yeah.
The John Webb?
James
Webb.
The
James Webb telescope.
Jimmy Webb.
I don't know who James was, but I bet I will by tomorrow. or by the end of the podcast tomorrow. So if you want to know who James Webb is or what's going on with the space telescope or all the other things around science, but I'm guessing because it's our first time talking back with the astrophysicist and the Reverend Paul Wallace, that's going to happen tomorrow. So we'll see you right here for those things. And anything else there, Dan?
Nope. Do not put humidifiers in your guitars.
Let's thank some people. Marjorie, Abe, thanks. Aunt B. Tuck. The Republican Party does not represent the majority of our families today. We have Catholic and Protestants, et cetera, in our families, and have gays and straights in our families, and we have blacks and whites and married, et cetera. The Republican Party of today does not represent the majority of us. Yeah, I think that's probably true. I wish it did that better, and the Democrats as well. Lonnie, thanks for your comments. I know there's some internal comments going on between commenters, so nice to see that. Some of that we'll be putting up. But Marjorie, again, thanks. And Bob and Don Weir, thanks for your comments. A lifetime in prison is hell. Instant death is a reprieve. On top of that, the reason we're told not to kill is because man is made in the image and likeness of God. Vengeance is mine, saith the Lord. Mm-hmm. Desi Gentry, thank you for your comments. Dave, Emma, Jackie. Well, it's good to see people stayed connected to all of this. Jack or Jake Hutton, sincere question. Do you think that a family victim member would be better off if she knew that the perpetrator were dead? I wonder if the grief she feels is actually connected to the existence of this person or not. Yeah, big question people have. Mm-hmm. All these things. Jay, thanks for your comments. Mike, didn't see yours there. Sorry. Sister Helen Bregan has been somebody who has worked really hard and is a real sign of light in this area and lives with people on death row. We were at a death penalty chamber down in Texas. It's a small group of people out there trying to raise a moral voice about an execution that was happening a couple of weeks ago. And some of the people there spend time with the victims on death row, and they'll tell you, I'm the only person outside of a prison guard that these prisoners have talked to in 18 years.
Wow.
They're not kept in solitary confinement, but they're kept in places that tend to be away from other prisoners. Talk to prison guards, and then some of these people just go in and visit. Just the humanity, the fact that atrocious things can be done by human beings is a thing we're having to recognize. Sometimes wanting to kill people who do heinous things is actually a way to try to work out that we don't want to believe that humanity is capable of these things. Mm. We want to make a monster of them and then treat them treat them differently so that we recognize that we're not the same as them.
Yeah.
And then Christina, the death penalty, as we've wrongly jailed too many, but in cases without a doubt they should be locked away and never heard from again. What was allowed with the Gacy, the serial killer, should have never been given the time of day afterward, no chance of parole, and there never should have ended up as a movie and on a cover. Mm. Yeah, that's the other thing, is that we have this weird obsession in this country to glorify and glamorize murderers.
Yeah.
It's just one of the quirky features.
Now there's a whole podcast industry around murder cases and just this fascination with murder.
Yeah. And then Mike, he also said an eye for an eye. I'm not sure who the he is in that one. I see. Ron is saying God said, do not kill. There are no exceptions. Then Mike says he also said an eye for an eye. But interestingly, we use an eye for an eye as shorthand for kill someone who's killed someone. We don't actually use it for people that take out somebody else's eye.
Which would also be awful.
I mean, think about that for a minute, right? An eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. Now, I would argue that what the Old Testament was arguing was that's the top limit. You can't go further than that. In other words, if in this argument at this time in this society by these people, they were organizing and they were saying, if someone throws a rock at you and it takes out your eye, you don't go burn down their village.
Right. It was actually a limit to retribution and a limit to violence.
Not a call up to it.
Yeah.
But to use an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth out of the book of Deuteronomy for 21st century North America or United States penal code, we don't do that when someone knocks someone's eye out. If I'm in a bar fight with you and I cut you with a bottle, I've just become an Irishman somehow. I cut you with a bottle and you lose your eye. No one I know goes to court and says, Judge, I just need you to go take out Doug's eye. He took Dan's eye. We need to take Doug's eye. We don't do an eye for an eye.
Mm-hmm.
But then it comes to the death penalty. People are like, well, an eye for an eye, and a tooth for a tooth. If I knocked your tooth out in that same bar fight, no one sends me to the dentist to have him pluck my tooth out.
Yeah.
So why do we believe that this sort of eye for an eye thing, and then we act kind of literalist about it, then becomes a metaphor for taking a life? This is the stuff we do with religious teaching that, is fair enough. But as somebody who's, a religious scholar, you can't use that. That's not an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth is not an argument for or against the death penalty. It's for removal of an eye and orthodontic and teeth work.
Yeah.
Brian, thanks for your comments. Back to wow, this was loaded today. I'm surprised.
Yeah.
And of course, thank you to the bots on YouTube. We really appreciate all that. Hey, if you've ever wondered about how you could help vote common good, and I'm not going to ask you for $1, not going to ask you for a penny, something you could do for us that would really help. You could go over to YouTube right now and subscribe to the Vote Common Good YouTube channel. Search Vote Common Good, click on channel, and subscribe to it. And then you could ask a friend to do it. You could do it with all the email accounts you have. Each one you could log into Google and do it with all of those. You could ask a couple of friends to join you in all their email accounts. Here's why that would help. The way algorithms work, the more subscribers you have, the more videos are played and the more they're spread. So one of the things we want to do is reach some benchmarks. There's some numbers that you hit, and we want to hit some of those numbers of subscribers to move this on further. For a lot of people who want to support us, they just don't always go to YouTube, or they don't subscribe. If they do, they don't even really know what that is or what it means. All it means is that the next time you log into YouTube, you're going to see that we have some new posts up. You don't have to watch them. You're not going to get any more ads pushed at you. It's not a way for us to sell you anything. It just helps us. The same thing is true on the podcast. If you only listen here, if you'd go to votecommongood.com/podcast or just search Common Good Podcast in your podcast app and subscribe to our podcast, that also really helps. Mm-hmm. Because it affects the algorithms. The algorithms, for all their weirdo-ness and seemingly inaccuracy, what they're trying to do is to send things to people that other people watch or listen to. You already watch or listen, so just help us out that way if you would. It would really go a long way. And let us know that you did. And if you do, let us know that you did. Subscribe either to the podcast or subscribe to the YouTube channel. Shoot us a little note, over at podcast@votecommongood.com or, anywhere here. We're going to send you a little something. We got a bunch of little swagger. We got stickers and buttons.
Get a button.
You might just get some stuff. We're just gonna say welcome aboard and thanks for doing your part. So I don't know, give a shot at that, would you? We'd appreciate it. If you're new to YouTube or new to podcasting, boy, this is a great way to begin. This is really beginner 101, and we'd love your help.
Yeah.
Is that good?
Yeah. Thanks everybody in the chat.
Big full day.
Yeah. Stick around tomorrow. We'll talk about science. A little less contentious topic. People have.
Yeah, science in America, that's probably less contentious, yeah.
All right, everybody.
Space is less contentious. You're right.
Oh, then you talk about billionaires in space, and people do have opinions. Yeah,
they do. Here we go again. Yeah. All right. Hey, see you all tomorrow.